Neanderthals continuously capture the imagination of not just the scientific community, but the entire world. They hold a fascination unlike any other hominin, appearing in media, art and popular culture for over a century. Their story is one of brutal misrepresentation, making them the most misunderstood of our evolutionary cousins. In this video, we'll trace the journey of Neanderthals, from their initial discovery with their expulsion from humanity to our modern portrayals today. Hi, I'm Louise, an archaeologist and a staunch supporter of Neanderthals. This video is actually inspired by a seminar I gave in my course, so I really hope you enjoy it, and let's get into the popular depictions of Neanderthals. Who exactly were the Neanderthals? Neanderthals, or Homo neanderthalensis, lived in Europe and parts of Western and Central Asia from roughly 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. They were humans, like us, but with a few key differences. They were shorter and stockier, had prominent brow ridges, larger noses, and a robust build. Neanderthals shared the earth with our species, Homo sapiens, for tens of thousands of years, and yes, there were moments of interaction, including interbreeding, but more on that later. Our story starts at the beginning, in the mid-19th century, with the first recognition of Neanderthals as something distinct. These early discoveries set the stage for how Neanderthals will be perceived and misrepresented in the decades to come. In 1856, a partial Neanderthal skeleton was unearthed in Feldhofer Cave in the Neander Valley, Germany. A local schoolteacher named Vorrat recognised the fossils as significant and sought the expertise of Schaffhausen, a German anthropologist. Together, they proposed that it remains represented an ancient form of human. Also, just to note, this is before Charles Darwin's Origins of Species, which was not published until 1859. This wasn't the first time Neanderthal remains had been discovered, but it was the first time they were identified as belonging to a species distinct from Homo sapiens. Schaffhausen published his findings in 1858, and 3 years later, George Busk translated this paper, bringing the Feldhofer 1 specimen to the attention of a global audience. To understand the world in which Neanderthals were about to enter, we need to take a quick detour into the 19th century views on evolution. Today, we understand evolution as a branching tree, with species diverging and coexisting in complex ways. But in the late 19th century, evolution was seen as a linear progression from savagery through barbarianism to our species with civilization. The evidence clearly demonstrated that Neanderthals lived at the same time as our species, so for this framework to be true, they had to be less civilized than us. So Neanderthals were promptly placed lower on this evolutionary ladder, and seen as ape-like and brutish. They had to fit into this linear scheme and reinforce this idea of evolution, meaning they could not be perceived as human. It's also worth noting that this linear view of evolution did not end with Homo sapiens as a whole. In the 19th century, the concept of ranking human races as inferior or superior was tied to these same flawed evolutionary ideas, reinforcing harmful biases that would persist for generations. In 1864, William King formally named the species Homo neanderthalensis, but this classification was initially rejected by his peers. In 1886, after more Neanderthal fossils were discovered in Belgium, the broader acceptance of King's terminology began to take hold. However, some scholars preferred a different term, Homo primigensis, literally meaning primitive man, reflecting this ongoing rejection of Neanderthals as human. It wasn't until 1911 that the tipping point for the dominant use of Homo neanderthalensis occurred, when Marcellin Boule used the term in his work on the Old Man of La Chapelle specimen. This study would go on to define Neanderthal interpretations for much of the next half-century, and even lingers today. On August 3rd, 1908, 2 Catholic priests discovered a prehistoric skeleton from a cave at La Chapelle aux Saints in France. This marked a historic moment, the discovery of the first, almost complete Neanderthal skeleton. The remains were transported to the National Museum of Natural History in Paris, where they were scrutinised by the renowned paleontologist Marcellin Boule. The individual, later nicknamed the Old Man of La Chapelle due to his advanced age, became central to Boule's studies. The following reconstruction image, published in 1909, has been attributed to being the cause of Neanderthals' long-lasting stereotype of being primitive and brutish. Boule's reconstruction depicted the Neanderthal with a pronounced curved spine, stooped posture, bent knees, and forward-jutting hips and head. He attributed these features not to age-related ailments despite identifying arthritis in the vertebrae, but to innate physical characteristics of Neanderthals as a whole species. By emphasising these traits without contextualising the effects of age or disease, Boule portrayed Neanderthals as hunched, slouching creatures. Adding to this, Boule compared the Neanderthal skeleton side by side with that of an Aboriginal Australian man, a choice that reflected the racist undertones of the early 20th century. This comparison reinforced a hierarchical view, placing Neanderthals and certain human groups at the lowest rungs of the evolutionary ladder. Boule's analysis extended beyond physical traits to psychological assumptions. He claimed the Neanderthals' low vaulted cranium and pronounced brow ridges signified limited intelligence, a lack of moral sensibility, and an absence of higher order thinking. In his eyes, the physical attributes of Neanderthals mirrored a brutish and savage nature, closer to apes than humans. Ultimately, this reconstruction was as much as an ideological statement as it was a scientific one. His conclusion about the Neanderthals' intelligence, posture, and morality shaped public perception for decades, perpetuating an image of Neanderthals as clumsy, unintelligent beings, an image supposedly grounded in scientific accuracy. In 1911, Arthur Keith published a contrasting interpretation to Boule's depiction of Neanderthals, accompanied by an illustration titled "Not in the Gorilla Phase, Man of 500,000 Years Ago." Keith's work directly challenges Boule's interpretation, instead presenting a version of Neanderthals that leaned much closer to modern humans, both in appearance and behaviour. Keith criticised Boule for exaggerating the gorilla-like features in Neanderthals' face, asserting that, upon closer examination, Neanderthals show no more resemblance to apes than their modern representatives. As a self-proclaimed authority on human skeletal morphology, Keith rejected Boule's claims about poor posture, stating the lower limbs did not support the notion of a stooped, hunched stance. Keith argued Boule had overstated these ape-like traits of Neanderthal skull and posture. Keith's depiction of Neanderthals was shaped by his belief in the Neanderthal phase theory. This hypothesis proposed that Neanderthals were a direct evolutionary link between Homo erectus and modern humans, making them a necessary predecessor in the story of human evolution. To support his own theory, Keith's reconstruction emphasised the human-like attributes, equipping his Neanderthal with fire, tools, and even a necklace, painting a picture of intelligence, creativity, and sophistication. While we know these features are much more true compared to Boule's, Keith's vision of a Neanderthal, however, was also just validating his own theories rather than just critiquing Boule. He also had a need for Neanderthals to fit into his evolutionary narrative, shaped by his own interpretation. This is evidenced by the fact that when the infamous Piltdown skull was discovered, a find that was claimed to be the missing evolutionary link between Homo erectus and modern humans, Keith completely shifted his stance. The Piltdown skull was a combination of human-like cranium and an ape-like mandible, and this was dated by Keith to be anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million years old. This therefore offered the perfect evidence to support his evolutionary framework, and he no longer needed Neanderthals to fill this role. Unfortunately for Keith, the Piltdown skull would later be revealed as a forgery, but this is a realisation that came 40 years after its discovery, and Keith championed its authenticity for much of his careers. However, just before his death, Keith became aware of the fraud, and his obituary reflected his subsequent disillusionment, noting that he had lost faith in the testimony of his fellow workers. 117 years later, technological advancements have revolutionised how we reconstruct the past. Today, we know that the old man of La Chapelle lived between 47,000 and 56,000 years ago, passing away at about 40 years old, a remarkable age for a Neanderthal. His skeleton revealed severe osteoarthritis and evidence of regrowth along his gums where teeth had been lost, suggesting he may have needed to grind his food to eat. In his final years, members of his social group likely cared for him, offering a glimpse of compassion and community. Facial reconstruction techniques now allow us to visualise the face of the old man of La Chapelle, bringing his humanity to life in ways Boule's interpretation could never achieve. For decades, a lack of new Neanderthal discoveries allowed the brutish and intelligent stereotypes to persist unchallenged, allowing it to take root. However, in the mid-20th century, a shift began to occur. In 1953, the Piltdown Man hoax was finally exposed. Further hominin discoveries such as Homo erectus and Australopithecines provided more evolutionary context and highlighted the sophistication of Neanderthals compared to these much earlier ancestors, portraying them as far less ape-like and strange. Global events also played a role in reshaping views. The horrors of World War II, which ended in 1945, led to global shifts in perspectives of race and imperialism. Scientific racism, including the belief in biological hierarchies, faced significant criticism and began to retreat from both the public and academic spheres. This reevaluation extended to Neanderthals. In 1957, William Strauss Jr. and Alexander Cave revisited Boule's analysis of the Old Man of La Chapelle, pinpointing inaccuracies and arguing that Neanderthals were actually surprisingly similar to modern humans. Famously, they wrote, if he could be reincarnated and placed in a New York subway, provided that he were bathed, shaved, and dressed in modern clothing, it is doubtful whether he would attract any more attention than some of its other denizens. This echoed Charlton Coon's earlier 1939 depiction of the Old Man of La Chapelle, dressed in a suit and hat, suggesting that perceived differences were often rooted in superficial features like grooming and attire. Coon's illustration had already opened the door to the debates Boule had started. Archaeological discoveries continue to challenge outdated stereotypes, and Shanidar Cave is a pivotal example. Between 1951 and 1960, Ralph Selecki's excavations at the site uncovered the remains of 10 Neanderthal individuals, some providing evidence of intentional burial. One of these is Shanidar 1. He was aged between 35 and 50 at the time of his death. His skeleton revealed that throughout his life he'd sustained multiple severe injuries, but all of these show signs of healing, and none of which resulted in his death. He would definitely not have been able to survive without care from his group, which he obviously received. This demonstrated a level of compassion and community that directly contradicted the brutish and primitive narrative. Another significant discovery was Shanidar 4, an individual intentionally buried with pollen traces found in the surrounding soil. This was initially interpreted as evidence of a foul burial, and this discovery, which is later attributed to burying rodents, was groundbreaking at the time. It emphasised the human-like behaviours of Neanderthals, leading Selecki to famously state, although the body was archaic, the spirit was modern. By the 1970s, the idea that Neanderthals shared many similarities among humans had gained traction among researchers. However, despite such advancements, lingering stereotypes persisted, particularly in the public imagination. The publication of the Neanderthal genome in 2010 marked another groundbreaking moment. Previously, theories around Neanderthal extinction often centered on violence or being outcompeted by modern humans, ideas stemming from the stereotypes they were inferior and brutish. While some interbreeding events had been suggested, it was thought these were extremely rare. But with the Neanderthal genome, the discovery that people outside of Africa carry approximately 2% Neanderthal DNA proved that interbreeding between Neanderthals and humans occurred multiple times. This discovery fundamentally reframed how we view Neanderthals. Despite being extinct for 40,000 years, in a sense, they aren't truly extinct. Neanderthals live on within us, profoundly undermining the perception of them as less than human. As much as I'd like to say the story ends here, stereotypes about Neanderthals continue to shape public perception, often distorting the reality of who they actually were. I've identified that these stereotypes fall into two categories, ones that have persisted for the past 169 years, and newer ones that have emerged more recently. Violence remains one of the oldest stereotypes. While less commonly believed today, popular culture does still occasionally portray Neanderthals as aggressive. For example, the horror film Out of Darkness depicts Neanderthals as violent, but not excessively so, and it is a good watch, so I would recommend it. The Netflix documentary Secrets of Neanderthals from 2024 does a commendable job showcasing their sophistication, but still sort of focuses on violent aspects, but reflects the gradual shift in portrayal. Similarly, the video game Far Cry Primal features Neanderthals as antagonists, but they are formidable, showing a blend of violence and sophistication. There has been a noticeable increase in human-like portrayals and research emphasising their complexity. The stereotype of stupidity also lingers. The term Neanderthal is still quite commonly used to describe someone who's uncivilised or brutish, despite now knowing that Neanderthals weren't really the case. This is a narrative that archaeology is continuing to challenge, and one that I hope maybe fades over time. Now moving into the newer stereotypes, depictions of Neanderthals often show them with white skin, influenced by genetic research from the early 2000s. However, later studies revealed that some Neanderthals likely had darker skin, brown eyes, and deep red hair. This white Neanderthal stereotype has persisted and disturbingly being co-opted by white supremacists as a marker of European purity. This is even though Neanderthal DNA is found in populations worldwide, including African genomes, which is contrary to earlier research. Then there's what I'm calling the more absurd stereotypes. Headlines have sensationalised Neanderthals as overly sexual beings, possibly stemming from the interbreeding discoveries, or perhaps just humanity's obsession with sex, as sex can make people read headlines. Products branded as Neanderthals, such as beard oils, perfumes, and even these testosterone supplements, now maybe portray them as the epitome of manliness and strength, which is a dramatic shift from the earlier depictions of Neanderthals as undesirable, so maybe we've swung too far in the opposite direction. To sum up where we stand today, I found this clip that sort of encapsulates the mix of progress and lingering misconceptions.
Do you know there's a theory that Neanderthals, we want to think that Neanderthals look like us. There's this crazy theory that they look like gorillas and that we don't know what they looked like on the outside, and that they had big eyes that they could see at night like cats.
Yeah, damn.
Because they had eyes that are much larger than our eyes.
They were smarter than them?
Yeah, but there are also those theories that they hunted us. There's some pretty cool documentaries on it.
Wouldn't they be more thinner?
No, they were bigger.
They were
short.
Bigger?
Yeah, they were short but really heavy. They were like 5'7", 210 pounds,
so
and
they're
freakishly strong like a chimp.
So they're built like you.
Yeah, but freakishly strong like a chimp.
Well, I could dedicate an entire video to breaking down that clip, but I hope this does sort of show this mix of lingering misconceptions and sort of the new ones which we've got to today. The future of Neanderthals remains uncertain but undeniably promising. As technology continues to advance, we may uncover even more evidence of their sophistication, creativity, and humanity. Already we know Neanderthals are likely among the first artists and collectors, adorned themselves with personal ornamentation, and demonstrated care and compassion within their social groups. However, a growing concern in the perception of Neanderthals lies in the use of AI for reconstructing Neanderthal depictions. Recently, AI-generated images have increasingly appeared in news articles and social media to illustrate research findings, sometimes just for the sake of a quick visual rather than scientific accuracy. One example which I found deeply unsettling is an AI-generated reconstruction of a Neanderthal child, which introduced so many non-scientific elements and distorted the narrative of their humanity. This misuse of AI risks undoing decades of progress made by researchers in challenging stereotypes, which I've shown through this video. That said, please don't think I'm against AI. It's a very powerful tool and could definitely contribute meaningfully to archaeology, but when used responsibly. Perhaps it just highlights the need for archaeologists to take a more active role in reconstructions and using AI, ensuring its accuracy and integrity in the narratives we share. So in this video we've explored Neanderthals from their initial discovery all the way to their portrayals today. I hope you've enjoyed this one video and thank you so much for watching. I've linked references and further reading all down below which you can find. And yeah, do you think Neanderthals are still misrepresented, misunderstood, or do you think we're getting closer to uncovering the truth out about them? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like any more videos or have any questions, just let me know. Also, please remember to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.